When I left my body, I saw no fear, only light. And in that light, I heard the voice that spoke before the world began. He said, "You have prayed much, but you have not yet learned to let me pray through you." In that moment, every earthly striving fell away. I realized that I had spoken many words to heaven, but heaven was waiting for me to be silent enough for the Spirit to speak through my soul. That day, I did not just meet Jesus. I met the mystery of prayer itself. When I returned, I could no longer pray the same, because now I knew speaking in tongues is not a ritual. It is a resurrection. It is where your human limitation dies and divine power begins to live through you. When your tongue yields to the Spirit, your heart detaches from fear. You no longer pray from the earth upward. You pray from heaven downward. There was a time when I prayed with emotion, with noise, with striving, hoping God would hear. But Jesus whispered, "Be still. Let my Spirit take over." He showed me that true prayer is not about the sound of your voice, but the surrender of your heart. When you pray in the Spirit, you are not trying to reach God. You are allowing God to flow through you. You become a vessel, not a performer. He said, the reason so many grow weary in prayer is because they are still alive to themselves. That pierced me deeply. He continued, until the self dies, the Spirit cannot fully live through you. When I heard that, I understood. Emotional detachment is spiritual elevation. It is not apathy, it is peace. It is the state where storms may rage, but your inner man stands unmoved, because you are no longer praying for victory. You are praying from victory. I learned that the moment you speak in tongues, you step beyond emotion into communion. Your words no longer carry human weight. They carry divine resonance. In that realm, you don't convince God, you align with Him. You don't cry for help, you declare His will. And as you speak, unseen walls crumble, hidden wounds heal, and divine strength floods your soul. Jesus told me, when you pray in the Spirit, detach from what you feel and attach to what I have spoken. This is the secret of peace. Your emotions may scream, but your spirit will whisper truth. Your circumstances may shake, but your heart will rest in eternal assurance. Because the one who speaks the language of heaven cannot be moved by the language of earth. And so, when I pray now, I do not strive to believe. I rest in belief. I do not beg for miracles. I release them. Because in that heavenly language, my spirit has learned the rhythm of faith. Every syllable becomes a declaration. Not my will, but yours be done. There is a place in prayer where fear dies, ambition dies, the need to be seen dies, and only God remains. That is the place of tongues. That is where you stop performing and start transforming. And when you rise from that secret place, the world will not understand you, but heaven will recognize you, because your voice will carry the sound of divine authority, the sound of one who has died to self, yet lives fully in God. True prayer begins where human language ends. There comes a moment in every believer's life when words fail, when the vocabulary of the mind cannot express the burden of the soul. You may have prayed with all your understanding, poured out your heart in every way you know how, and yet there lingers a silence deep within that no phrase can touch. That silence is not emptiness, it is invitation. It is the Holy Spirit waiting to take over where you have reached the limit of your own language. Prayer at its truest form is not the mind speaking to God, but the Spirit communing with Spirit. When the scripture says that the Spirit makes intercession for us with groanings that cannot be uttered, it is describing that mysterious transition where prayer ceases to be a human act and becomes a divine flow. Speaking in tongues is not just a sign, it is a surrender. It is the moment your intellect steps aside and your spirit takes the lead. God never intended prayer to remain trapped within the boundaries of human speech, because human speech is bound by understanding, and understanding is limited by experience. But the Spirit knows all things, searches all things, even the deep things of God. When you pray in your own language, you pray according to what you know. You pray within the boundaries of your memory, your emotions, your logic, your theology. But when you yield to the Spirit, you enter the realm of divine mystery. You begin to pray beyond your past, beyond your pain, beyond your reasoning. The Spirit prays through you according to the perfect will of God, aligning you with purposes you cannot yet see. It is like the wind blowing through a flute. The flute produces the sound, but the breath gives it life. Without the breath, there is no melody. Without the Spirit, prayer is only noise. This is why many people pray long, but experience little change. They think prayer is about information, telling God what is happening, explaining needs, asking for help. But the Spirit does not need information. He brings transformation. The moment you surrender your tongue, your will, your control, you allow heaven to speak through your human vessel. In that moment, you are no longer praying toward God. God is praying through you. That is why speaking in tongues has such power, because it bypasses the interference of doubt. The mind may waver, but the Spirit never doubts. The Spirit does not fear. The Spirit does not calculate. The Spirit knows when your words end, the Spirit's work begins. This is the hidden strength of those who live in constant communion. They are not carried by emotion, nor limited by vocabulary. They can walk in peace while the world collapses, because their connection to heaven does not depend on understanding. Their spirit speaks a language their mind cannot translate, yet their soul is strengthened as if fed by an invisible current of divine life. When the Spirit prays through you, He releases what the Father has already prepared. You are no longer striving for answers. You are releasing them. This is the essence of faith-filled prayer. To step beyond the edge of what you can say and let God finish the sentence. Many have tried to understand tongues intellectually, and because they cannot, they reject it. But tongues were never meant to be understood by the mind. They are meant to liberate the spirit from the limitations of the mind. When you speak in tongues, you are building a bridge between your weakness and God's strength. You are creating an atmosphere where heaven's language can flow unhindered through your human vessel. The Spirit's language does what human language cannot. It heals without explanation. It strengthens without evidence. It aligns you with heaven's rhythm without your awareness. You may not know what you are saying, but your spirit does. You may not see what is shifting, but something deep within you begins to change. The more you yield, the less you strive. The more you release control, the more you experience divine peace. Because prayer in its highest form is not communication, it is communion. It is the merging of two wills until there is only one voice, one flow, one heart beating between heaven and earth. Speaking in tongues is the language of divine partnership. It is not a strange sound or an emotional release. It is the holy conversation between the Creator and the created. When a believer prays in tongues, they are not speaking into the air. They are joining the Spirit of God in His eternal work. It is partnership in its purest form. God, who longs to move through His people, finds a yielded vessel in the one who allows the Spirit to pray through them. The tongue becomes the instrument, the breath becomes divine, and the words, though unknown to man, carry heaven's authority and purpose. In the natural, human partnership depends on agreement, communication, and mutual understanding. But divine partnership begins in surrender. You may not understand what you are saying, but your spirit understands. The Spirit of God dwelling within you speaks mysteries that align your life with God's perfect will. When you speak in tongues, you are not asking God to follow your plans. You are allowing Him to establish His. Every syllable you release in the Spirit is a seed of divine purpose planted into the soil of time. You may not see its growth immediately, but in the unseen realm, the Spirit is constructing realities, moving circumstances, and aligning hearts. This language is the only one not born from the mind of man, but from the Spirit of God. Every earthly language carries human limitation, emotion, and interpretation, but tongues carry none of that. It is the purest form of communication between your spirit and the Spirit of the living God. It cannot be corrupted by doubt, interrupted by fear, or misunderstood by the enemy. The devil understands the language of logic and emotion, but he cannot interpret the language of heaven. When you pray in tongues, you step into a communication channel the enemy cannot penetrate. It is a secret conversation between the throne of God and your inner man. Partnership with the Spirit means you are no longer the originator of your prayer. You become a participant in His. You stop striving to make things happen and begin to flow with what is already ordained. The Spirit does not guess or plead. He declares what is finished. And when He speaks through you, He releases those finished works into your present reality. This is why praying in tongues brings peace, even when nothing has changed yet. Because your spirit knows something has already been settled in heaven. The conflict may still exist around you, but within you there is a witness God has spoken, and His word cannot return void. There are moments when the Spirit will lead you to pray in tongues for something you cannot name. It may come as a sudden burden, a deep stirring, a cry that words cannot form. That is divine partnership in action. The Spirit searches all things and knows the mind of God. He sees what your eyes cannot. He prepares you for what you cannot foresee. When you yield to that stirring, you are allowing heaven to move through you on behalf of people, nations, and seasons you may never meet or understand. You become a channel of God's will on earth. In this partnership, control gives way to trust. The more you release your intellect, the more the Spirit can flow. Prayer then ceases to be a duty and becomes a dance. Heaven leading, you following. You begin to sense that the Spirit is not only praying through you, but shaping you. Your character starts to change. Your desires align with His. Your confidence grows not from what you know, but from whom you carry. Speaking in tongues is not an emotional escape. It is spiritual empowerment. It strengthens the inner man, renews faith, and builds a foundation of divine confidence. When the Spirit prays through you, you move from asking to aligning, from striving to resting. You begin to operate from heaven's rhythm, where things are not forced, but flow naturally through obedience and faith. This is the partnership Jesus promised. I will send the Helper. The Helper does not replace your voice. He refines it. He fills your weakness with strength, your ignorance with divine knowledge, and your silence with power. Through tongues, you are no longer limited by your understanding. You become united with the wisdom of eternity. Each prayer in the Spirit is heaven and earth working together. God's will being birthed through a willing heart, one breath at a time. Emotional detachment is not coldness, but consecration. It is the quiet strength that arises when your heart is no longer ruled by feelings, but anchored in faith. Many mistake detachment for indifference, as though to be unshaken means to be unfeeling. But in truth, emotional detachment is the fruit of intimacy with God. It is what happens when your emotions bow before divine peace, when the noise of fear and anxiety is silenced by the certainty of His presence. It is not a denial of emotion, but the sanctification of it. A transformation from being led by feelings to being led by the Spirit. There was a time when I believed that to pray with passion meant to cry louder, to feel more deeply, to display my faith with visible fervor. But the Spirit taught me that faith does not shout to prove itself. True faith stands still. It is the quiet assurance that does not depend on outcomes or applause. When your emotions are surrendered to God, you begin to see that storms are not sent to destroy you, but to reveal the stability of what you stand upon. Emotional detachment is that moment when your spirit says, even if the fig tree does not blossom, I will still rejoice. It is a declaration that peace is no longer dependent on circumstances. The flesh demands to feel in order to believe, but the Spirit believes even when it feels nothing. There is great freedom in reaching this place. It is where you are no longer a slave to your own reactions. People may misunderstand you, seasons may shift around you, but you remain steady because your anchor is not in emotion. It is in truth. When the Spirit of God fills a person, He does not erase emotion, He governs it. He turns fear into reverence, grief into surrender, and desire into purpose. You begin to love deeply yet hold lightly, to care greatly yet remain unmoved by outcomes. When you walk with God long enough, you will notice that He leads you through seasons of silence and stillness. These are not punishments, but refinements. He allows you to feel the emptiness of emotion so that you may discover the fullness of His peace. Emotional detachment grows in those moments when prayer feels dry, when worship feels distant, when heaven seems quiet. The Spirit is teaching you then not to depend on what you feel, but on what you know. This is spiritual maturity. To walk by faith and not by sight, to choose worship when there is no visible reason to sing. There is divine power in restraint. The world teaches you to react quickly, to defend yourself, to chase after validation. But the Spirit teaches you to pause, to wait, to let peace decide. Every time you choose calm over chaos, heaven recognizes it as victory. Emotional detachment is proof that your confidence no longer comes from approval, but from identity. You do not need to prove who you are, because your worth is hidden in Christ. And when your emotions no longer dictate your actions, your spirit becomes the dwelling place of divine authority. It is in that stillness that miracles begin. When your heart is quiet, the whisper of God becomes audible. When your emotions are no longer clouded by worry, revelation flows freely. The greatest visions are often received not in moments of excitement, but in moments of peace. God moves through calm hearts. The Spirit cannot flow where the waters are turbulent, but He moves freely in the surrendered soul. This is why Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray, not to escape people, but to detach from the noise of human emotion, so He could hear the heartbeat of the Father clearly. To detach emotionally does not mean to stop feeling love or compassion. It means to feel through the Spirit rather than through the flesh. You can weep without losing faith. You can hurt without losing peace. You can care deeply without being consumed. This balance is divine. It is the mark of those who have learned to rest in God's sovereignty. When your emotions are consecrated, you live from a place of inner freedom. You love people, but you are not owned by their opinions. You experience disappointment, but you are not destroyed by it. You face uncertainty, but you are not moved by fear. You have learned the sacred art of standing still while heaven fights for you. When the flesh is silent, the Spirit speaks clearly. The voice of God is never absent, but it is often drowned out by the noise of our own striving. The flesh is loud. It argues, analyzes, and demands to be heard. It wants control, recognition, and explanation. But the Spirit speaks in stillness. His voice is gentle, yet carries the weight of eternity. When the heart quiets its restlessness and the mind releases its need to understand, revelation begins to flow. This is why silence before God is not inactivity, it is alignment. It is the posture of surrender that allows heaven's frequency to fill the soul. So many believers pray yet never hear, not because God is far, but because the flesh never stops speaking. The flesh prays out of fear, afraid that silence means abandonment. But silence is the language of intimacy. When the Spirit speaks, He does not shout above your chaos. He waits until you have chosen peace. The Spirit does not compete with human emotion. He waits for consecration. That is why some of the most powerful moments in prayer happen not when you are talking, but when you are still. The flesh fears silence, but the Spirit finds home in it. When the flesh dies, spiritual clarity is born. The death of the flesh is not the destruction of the body, but the dethroning of self. It is when your desires, your reasoning, your pride, and your fear lose their power to control you, then the Spirit begins to guide you with a wisdom that no man could teach. You start to sense His direction without hearing words, to discern His will without needing signs. The inner man becomes attuned to the rhythm of heaven, and your decisions flow from peace instead of pressure. This is the life of the Spirit-led believer, calm, confident, and clear, even in confusion. The Spirit cannot speak through a vessel is already full of noise. When your heart is filled with complaint, when your mind is filled with worry, when your emotions are consumed with offense, the signal of heaven becomes faint. But the moment you let go, when you choose to forgive, when you release your need to be understood, when you allow stillness to settle in your spirit, you suddenly perceive what was hidden. God's voice is not discovered through striving. It is received through surrender. The clearest instructions come to the quietest hearts. In the silence of flesh, power flows. Many think strength is shown through movement, through action, through visible fervor. But spiritual power is the ability to rest while others panic, to hear when others argue, to discern when others guess. It is the calm authority that comes from knowing that you have heard from God. When the Spirit speaks, there is no confusion. His word does not compete with emotion. It commands peace. You will find that when your spirit becomes still, the Spirit of God within you begins to lead with clarity and purpose. What once felt complicated becomes simple, and what once seemed impossible becomes effortless. In every great move of God, there is first a death, the silencing of the flesh. Before miracles are birthed, there is always stillness. Elijah heard the earthquake, the wind, and the fire, but God's voice came in a gentle whisper. That whisper still speaks today, but only those who have silenced their inner storms can hear it. The Spirit's voice is like a melody that plays softly beneath the noise of the world, waiting for a heart quiet enough to listen. When you find that stillness, fear loses its language, anxiety loses its power, and confusion loses its grip. The Spirit speaks not to the surface, but to the depths. He bypasses your logic and speaks to your essence. He reveals things your intellect could never discover. The motives of the heart, the hidden paths of destiny, the unseen purposes of trials. To hear Him, you must become empty of self. Every time you lay down your agenda, every time you choose humility over reaction, every time you decide to listen instead of speak, the Spirit's voice becomes clearer. The silence of the flesh is not weakness. It is the gateway to divine revelation. It is where your will dissolves and His will takes shape, where prayer turns from petition to communion, and where the whisper of God becomes the loudest sound in your life. Confidence in prayer is born from intimacy, not performance. There is a kind of boldness that cannot be taught, a quiet assurance that flows only from knowing the one to whom you speak. True confidence is not found in how long you pray or how loudly you declare, but in how deeply you abide. When prayer becomes a performance, it loses its power. But when prayer flows from relationship, it carries authority. God does not respond to well-crafted words. He responds to hearts that know Him. The one who walks closely with God does not beg for answers. He speaks with the calm certainty of a child who knows his father will act. Many pray with anxiety because they pray from distance. They know about God, but have not learned to rest in Him. The mind wonders, will He hear me? Does He care? Am I worthy? These questions vanish in the presence of intimacy. When you know His nature, you stop questioning His response. You no longer pray as a stranger, trying to convince a reluctant king. You pray as a son speaking to a loving father. Intimacy transforms prayer from obligation into communion, from striving into resting. Confidence is not arrogance, it is the fruit of nearness. The closer you draw to Him, the more you realize that He has already drawn near to you. When prayer becomes relationship, fear loses its grip. You begin to speak not to change God's mind, but to align your heart with His. The Spirit teaches you to pray according to the will of the Father, and in that unity, there is unshakable confidence. You no longer wonder whether your prayer will work. You simply know that heaven has already moved. This knowing is not emotional, it is spiritual. It is born from experience, from walking through silence, tears, and waiting, and still finding Him faithful. Every answered prayer builds faith, but every season of waiting builds trust. Confidence grows not only in miracles, but in the moments when nothing happens, yet you continue to believe. There is a sacred boldness that comes when you learn to hear His voice. The more you listen, the more certain you become of His promises. Intimacy produces discernment, and discernment produces confidence. You begin to recognize the tone of His whisper, the rhythm of His guidance. And once you have heard Him in the secret place, no voice of fear can shake you in the open. Confidence in prayer does not come from quoting Scripture mechanically, but from living Scripture relationally. When the Word becomes your dwelling, not your argument, faith becomes natural. The greatest prayer warriors are not those who sound powerful, but those who have been hidden long enough to learn His heart. They have cried until words ran out, waited until time lost meaning, and in that surrender discovered a deeper reality, that prayer is not about moving God, but about being moved by Him. Their confidence is quiet, almost unnoticeable, but it carries weight. When they speak, heaven listens, not because their words are impressive, but because their hearts are aligned with divine authority. The secret of answered prayer is not effort, it is unity. There is a peace that comes when you know you are heard. It changes how you pray, how you walk, how you face challenges. You stop panicking when delays come because you know His timing is perfect. You stop comparing your journey to others because you know your path is divinely designed. Confidence in prayer is the fruit of continual fellowship. It grows in the soil of surrender, watered by obedience, and strengthened through consistency. The more time you spend in His presence, the less you need to explain your needs. You begin to realize that He already knows, and that His silence is often His way of deepening your dependence. True intimacy creates fearless faith. When you have encountered His love in the secret place, you cannot doubt His faithfulness in the storm. The enemy's greatest weapon is distance, to make you forget that you are already one with the Spirit. But every moment of communion restores that awareness. Prayer then becomes a conversation, not a contest. You do not pray to prove your devotion. You pray because you cannot live without His presence. That kind of prayer changes everything. It turns weakness into strength, uncertainty into peace, and fear into confidence. The one who knows the heart of God no longer pleads for miracles. He walks in them. Purpose thrives in detachment because purpose is born in the realm of the Spirit, not in the noise of emotion or the pressure of human approval. The more you are attached to people's opinions, the more your purpose becomes clouded. When you define yourself by applause, rejection will destroy you. But when your identity is rooted in the presence of God, nothing external can alter your direction. Detachment is not the absence of care. It is the presence of clarity. It is the ability to love people deeply, yet remain unmoved by their acceptance or rejection. When you detach from the need to be understood, you gain the strength to walk faithfully in what God has called you to do. Every great calling requires a breaking, a separation between what is emotional and what is eternal. There will come a moment when you must walk alone, when those you expected to support you will not understand your path. That is not a sign of failure, but of refinement. God detaches you from dependency so that your roots can grow deeper in Him. When your purpose depends on the affirmation of others, it is still immature. But when your purpose stands firm in solitude, it becomes unstoppable. Detachment is the purification of purpose. It removes mixture, pride, and distraction until only obedience remains. The Spirit of God often leads through seasons where nothing makes sense to the natural mind. In those moments, the flesh will fight for control, craving security and validation. But the Spirit whispers, "Trust me." Detachment allows that whisper to become louder than fear. When you release the need to understand everything, you make room for divine wisdom to guide you. Faith does not need details, it needs direction. The detached soul can move forward even when the path is hidden, because it is no longer anchored to outcomes, but to obedience. This is where true purpose thrives. In hearts that have died to self yet are alive to God's will. Attachment to outcomes creates anxiety. Detachment births peace. When you fix your eyes on results, you become a slave to what you cannot control. But when you fix your heart on God's purpose, you rest in His sovereignty. Jesus walked in this detachment. He loved humanity perfectly, yet He was never controlled by human emotion. He could heal the multitudes one day and face rejection the next without losing focus. His confidence came not from the crowd's approval, but from the Father's voice. "This is my beloved Son." When your assurance comes from heaven, the world cannot shake you. Purpose grows in hiddenness. God often conceals the most powerful callings behind seasons of silence, obscurity, and misunderstanding. It is there that He trains you to detach from the need to be seen. You learn to value His approval above all else. The detachment of the Spirit is not withdrawal from life. It is engagement from a higher place. You still work, serve, and love, but you do it from rest, not from need. You no longer act to be recognized. You act because you are assigned. Every decision becomes simple because it is not filtered through emotion, but through conviction. The detached soul becomes unshakable because it no longer builds identity on outcomes. Success does not inflate it, and failure does not define it. When God asks for surrender, He is not trying to take something from you, but trying to free you from what binds you. The moment you release your grip on control, the Spirit begins to move unhindered. Detachment is not loss, it is liberation. It is the realization that your worth is not tied to performance. Your peace is not tied to circumstance, and your future is not tied to people. There is a supernatural confidence that arises when you are detached from the temporary. You stop chasing what fades and start building what lasts. You stop fearing what leaves and start trusting what remains. In that space, purpose breathes freely. It no longer competes with ego or emotion. It flows naturally from divine identity. You begin to walk with quiet authority, not because everything around you agrees, but because everything within you is settled. Detachment allows your soul to dwell in stillness while your spirit moves with power. That is where purpose matures, not in noise, but in peace, not in striving, but in surrender. The moment you lose yourself in the Spirit, you find your true self. There is a divine paradox hidden in that truth. You must die to who you think you are in order to discover who you were created to be. The self that clings to control, to identity shaped by fear, pride, and human expectation cannot carry the fullness of divine purpose. But when you yield, when you let go of the need to define yourself, defend yourself, or direct your own story, something miraculous happens. The Spirit begins to reveal a version of you that is untouched by failure, unshaken by opinion, and unhindered by the past. It is the you that was designed in eternity before the world ever formed. The you that carries heaven's DNA. To lose yourself in the Spirit is not to disappear, it is to awaken. It is the moment when your ego fades and divine awareness rises. The world teaches you to find yourself through achievement, validation, and identity rooted in comparison. But the Spirit leads you the opposite way, into surrender, into stillness, into hiddenness. In that surrender, the false layers of who you thought you were begin to fall away. The Spirit strips off every label the world placed on you until only purpose remains. The one who has lost himself in God is no longer driven by ambition or fear of loss, because he knows he owns nothing and yet possesses everything. When you are lost in the Spirit, you stop living from reaction and start living from revelation. The flesh reacts to circumstances, but the Spirit responds from truth. You no longer ask, what should I do? Because your heart already knows. You begin to move instinctively in alignment with God's rhythm. The Spirit becomes your compass, your counselor, your constant companion. You start seeing through His eyes, hearing through His perception, loving with His heart. This is not theory. It is transformation. It is a life lived from the inside out, where your actions are no longer forced, but flow naturally from divine union. The process of losing yourself is often painful because it requires the death of pride. It asks you to release every false sense of control. It may feel like emptiness at first, but that emptiness is sacred. It is the clearing where God builds something eternal. The Spirit cannot fill what is already full. When you let go of your own will, you make room for His. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you discover your worth has already been established by grace. To lose yourself in the Spirit is to exchange striving for resting, fear for faith, confusion for clarity. In that state of surrender, peace becomes your natural atmosphere. You no longer carry the heavy weight of trying to be enough, because you have become one with the one who is more than enough. You stop striving to be noticed, for your identity is now hidden in God. You stop fearing rejection, for the Spirit within you whispers daily, "You are my beloved." The more you yield, the freer you become. The self that dies in prayer rises in purpose. You begin to understand what it means to be a vessel, empty of self but overflowing with divine life. When you live from that place, even your weaknesses become instruments of grace. The Spirit transforms your scars into testimonies, your failures into wisdom, your silence into strength. The person you once tried to protect, the self bound by insecurity, comparison, and fear, no longer rules you. In its place stands someone unrecognizable to the world, but fully known to heaven, a soul alive with purpose, peace, and power. The Spirit does not erase individuality, He redeems it. He amplifies what was buried under shame and awakens the divine design within. To lose yourself in the Spirit is to enter the reality Jesus lived, to walk on earth, yet think like heaven. You become aware that life is not about survival, but about surrender. Your days no longer revolve around personal ambition. They revolve around divine assignment. You no longer seek to be significant, you seek to be available. In this place, miracles happen naturally because you are no longer the source, you are the channel. You have died to self, consciousness, and divine consciousness now rules your being. This is true freedom, to live so yielded that your every breath becomes prayer. Your every word carries life, and your every step echoes eternity. When all is said and done, everything in this life will fade. The noise, the striving, the titles, the applause. But what is born of the Spirit will endure forever. The true victory of a believer is not found in how much they achieve, but in how deeply they have surrendered, speaking in tongues, walking in detachment, living in divine partnership. All of it leads to one sacred place, perfect union with God. When you live yielded, you no longer chase purpose, you embody it. You no longer seek miracles. You become a vessel through which they flow. The Spirit does not call you to impress the world, but to express heaven. So lose yourself completely in Him. Let every fear fall. Let every burden dissolve. And let the voice of the Spirit rise within you. For when you die to yourself, you do not lose your life. You finally find the life that was always meant to be yours.